Welcome back to Comics with Drew. I'm Drew, and today I'm reviewing The Amazing Spider-Man, number 6 or 900. It's hard to tell, but this is the Legacy 900, which would be the 900th issue of the official canon of Spider-Man, I guess. So, I've never really taken the legacy numbering seriously because Marvel has a real habit of rebooting their characters and giving you new volumes and new number ones all the time. And it's kind of like a sales gimmick. It's kind of a way to get, you know, crazy people like myself to go out and buy a comic because this might be a valuable number one, right? And I feel like it's kind of like cheating with the way Marvel does it because, like, say with DC, when you have Action Comics 1000 or Detective Comics 1000 or whatever, it's actually because they've kind of organically got there. So, but those comics started off in the 30s and the 40s, whereas Spider-Man started off in the 60s. So while it feels like those characters kind of those books kind of came by it naturally, it's kind of artificial, I think, with Spider-Man. Because I mean, frankly, you could publish 10 books a month, and then before you know it, you'd have 900. So, but I digress. So the issue here is the 900th official issue of the Amazing Spider-Man, and it's average. I mean, here's the thing. So this thing is huge, right? It's square bound, right? Look at that. I don't know if the camera's focusing, but it's it's funny. Someone said, "Look, it's Amazing Spider-Man number 6. You can actually put it on your bookshelf." I'm like, "No, I'm not going to put this on my bookshelf. Are you crazy?" It's got the Legacy 900. Can you imagine sticking this on your bookshelf? Anyway, but here's the thing. It's the 900th issue, so they want to make a big deal about it, and they want to, make an oversized comic, and then they want to charge you $10 for it. And again, this goes back to my complaints with starting a new volume. I don't think that you should start a new volume of a title, in this case, The Amazing Spider Man, unless there's a good reason for it. Like you've got a killer artist team or a killer writing team that's made their names either historically through working with Spider-Man or the title, or they have done great things with other books. And I just don't see that kind of situation with the Amazing Spider-Man, especially this current volume that came out. And I've done all these different videos where I said, "Oh, it sucks," and I'm right, it does suck, and it's just been a total misunderstanding of Peter Parker and Spider-Man and the way the characters relate. So I've been a big advocate of Peter Parker with Mary Jane because I think that that's the best combination for Peter Parker. And the last arc, the last 5 issues, kind of destroyed all that. Well, they didn't kind of destroy it; they totally obliterated it. And it's just one of these things that just drives people crazy because at some point, you want to stop rehashing the same kind of story over and over and over again. And that does not seem to be resolved with Spider-Man number 900. So, with a lot of, oversized, centennial issues or half centennial issues, like if it's like an 850 or something like that, usually I think the best way to approach these types of things is to get a variety of all-star artists and writers to contribute short stories that I think really speak to the essence of what the character is. Now, they don't do that with this particular issue. What they decided to do was they actually decided that they want to approach it kind of similarly in the fact that this issue is about who Spider-Man really is, right? And the way that they do that is they drag out this character from Spider-Man number 8, the Amazing Spider-Man number 8, called the Living Brain. And then the Living Brain winds up putting together an Adaptoid, which has, and if you're not familiar with the Adaptoids, what it is it's a, or I think it's, you can have several of them. I'm not sure. I'm not really all that familiar with the lore of it. But the bottom line is an Adaptoid is kind of like the way it sounds. It adapts to different things. So essentially, what you can do is you can program the Adaptoid robot with the powers and make it look like any particular person or superhero or superpowered being that you can think of. Actually, you might want to go back and read Amazing Spider-Man number 8. It's definitely a different kind of style of comics, so be forewarned if you've not if you're used to modern comics, it's a different kind of thing. So it might be a bit of a chore to read for some people. But basically, The Living Brain, which debuted in that issue, the purpose of it was to answer all of life's big questions, right? And because of that, in that particular issue, the big dramatic thing was whether or not it can identify who Spider-Man was, right? Because that's what all the idiot high schoolers decided that was the most important question. Who's Spider-Man, right? Of course, naturally. So shenanigans ensue, and the living brain gets somehow bumped and short-circuited so that it starts attacking Spider-Man. And so I'm not going to really get into what happens there, but ultimately that's the genesis or the idea that they decided to go with for Amazing Spider-Man number 900 or number 6, whichever one you want to call it. In this particular book, the living brain comes back and basically creates an Adaptoid with all the different powers of the Sinister Six, and then attacks Spider-Man. And the idea is that it wants to find out who Spider-Man is again. Ultimately, the book winds up being a situation where it's not about who Spider-Man actually is physically or like his actual secret identity is, but it's more about the character of Spider-Man. You know, what makes Spider-Man Spider-Man. It's a unique idea, but I don't think it's necessarily something that's super memorable, and it's definitely not worth $10. Now, one of the reasons why it's $10 is because it's not just this long oversized story. You have 3 other backup stories, which, you know, the first one is actually not that bad. It's a short story about Peter Parker returning library books, but again, it's not really something that you really need, right? You know, I would save that kind of story and the next story, which is a Jimmy Kimmel story, which is basically Spider-Man meets Jimmy Kimmel, which I hate those kinds of stories. They've done this many times before. There's one where Spider-Man meets Barack Obama, right? You know, after Barack Obama got elected, and apparently Joe Biden shows up in another particular issue of Spider-Man. I'm not a big fan of Spider-Man meeting real life people because it takes you out of it. It's like fourth wall breaking, right? I don't really believe that Jimmy Kimmel exists in the world of Spider-Man. I just don't. And I don't really care how well they can render Jimmy Kimmel. It just seems like I feel like I'm reading like a Snickers candy bar ad or something like that, or an advertisement for Jimmy Kimmel's TV show. And that's not really interesting to me. That's one of the short stories. And then you have a Dan Slott short story, which is really 2 pages long. And it's the first thing I've read from Dan Slott in years. And the reason why is because Dan Slott decided to run a blockchain. And so I'm blocked from reading Dan Slott's tweets, right? He's blocked me on Twitter, so I can't respond to him. So my opinion about that is that I'm a grown-ass man, and you know, I can follow whoever I want to follow, and Dan Slott is in no position to tell me who I can or can't follow, and therefore I don't spend money on books by Dan Slott. You hear that, Marvel out there? If you ever see this, I don't buy intentionally a book that's got Dan Slott's name on the cover. Period. I don't care if it's Spider-Man. Like there's a new Spider-Man that he's writing. I'm not going to buy that book. I'm not going to review that book because, frankly, I think he's an ass. I'm getting off on a tangent, but the bottom line is this is the only Dan Slott I've read. It's not a bad story, but again, it's part of 3 short stories that are tacked on to the end of a book that has a mediocre story. I really don't see the point of any of this, right? If you're going to do a 900 legacy, you know, I understand it's the 900th issue of Spider-Man. Do something that's epic, you know, throw some money at like Todd McFarlane, right? Have him come back and do a kick-ass, you know, Spawn crossover with Spider-Man, right? There's a Spawn Batman crossover coming up. Why can't we have a Spawn Spider-Man crossover? That would be awesome. You know, I'd totally be down for that. But that would be worthy of like a number 900 issue. Just Zeb Wells with, you know, Ed McGuinness drawing an oversized, nostalgic, you know, member berries kind of situation with, you know, a character that no one cares about. Honestly, to tell you the truth, it just seems kind of like a waste of time. It's a waste of everybody's time. So while the book doesn't actively suck, it's just not something that I think, you know, is worth $10. It just isn't. So that's my review of the book. You know, there isn't a whole lot of, well, actually, there is one other thing. This is another thing that pisses me off. Mary Jane has gotten married off to this other dude in the last 5 issues, and we still don't know anything about that. But at the end of this issue, he's back again with Black Cat, and it's like, I feel like I'm getting pissed all over. Yeah, so we're $30 into the story, and we still don't know what the hell's going on with Mary Jane, and or why any of this got blown up in the first place. So, I'm a big fan of a good story that kind of teases you along, but you've got to move the story along, and that doesn't seem to be what's going on with this current issue or this current run of Spider-Man. Honestly, to tell you the truth, it seems like they are like saying, hey, we understand who Spider-Man really is, because I think a lot of the criticism of the last 5 issues has been the fact that they don't seem to really know Peter Parker or understand Spider-Man, and Peter Parker's been a bit of a dick. So this particular issue of number 6 here, number 900, where they basically ask the question, who's Peter Parker? Who's Spider-Man? And then all the different characters talk about who Spider-Man really is and what he means. Maybe that's kind of them trying to say that they know. But here's my answer to that. Just show it, actually put it in the book. Don't tell us what Spider-Man's supposed to be. Just do what Spider-Man is supposed to be. Depict him that way. And we'll see what happens. So let's get into the art. Like I said, Ed McGuinness is doing the art on this book. He's definitely got a more professional look to it. It's a more polished look to it. But again, we're back to the situation where we've got super cartoony art. Now, to McGuinness's credit, it appears that he's actually trying to do what John Romita Jr. is doing as far as the style of the book is concerned. So he's got these oversized big heads and these kind of squatty, short little characters. So yeah, even though the art is actually better, it still looks weird, right? This is not really what you want for a top flight book. I reviewed Daredevil, and Daredevil has much better artwork in it. And that's the kind of art that you would want to expect to see in a Spider-Man book. So on page 6, basically, is an example of what I'm talking about with the big heads here. You've got Flash, and then you've got Aunt May, and then you've got some other characters, and they look weird. They've got oversized heads. They're not super round heads like what Romita's been doing, but they're still not quite the right proportion. So you've got this panel. Also, another thing about this book, this is a square-bound book, but a lot of stuff happens far too close to the gutter, so art gets cut off. Later on in the book, you actually have this 2-page spread where, the Adaptoid is fighting Spider-Man and the Sinister Six, and, his face is directly in the gutter. So, this is terrible stuff. Guys, if you're doing these kinds of 2-page spreads, what you want to put in the gutter is something that's not what you want the focal point of the art to be. So if the face of the villain or the protagonist or the hero or whatever is the focal point, it needs to be off center. It doesn't need to be directly in the gutter or right next to the gutter. There's plenty of room here where they could have moved Doc Ock back like another inch or two and then moved in the Adaptoid's face. That would have been much better here, and then you would have had better art. But when you are putting together a book that's $10 and it's a premium book and it's supposed to be a big issue and it's a big story and you've got a 2-page splash page situation, do it right. I don't really understand how this can happen, right? In editorial, they need to be looking at this. The artist should know better, honestly, to be perfectly honest with you. But, it's just one of these things where it's, bad planning and it's bad editing, and you would expect Marvel in their flagship comic book to get it right, but they don't. One of the pages I think is actually really good is this particular page where he's talking to the living brain, and this is the way Spider-Man's supposed to look. His face is kind of almond shaped and his eyes are kind of suspicious but very expressive. It's the kind of stuff that we need to see more of in this run if it's going to get any better at all. But if there's one panel that kind of distills the essence of this particular issue, it's this particular panel here where you have I can't even believe this. You've got Spider-Man patting Doc Ock's arms, like his octopus arms, and they are in the shape of a heart. So this kind of cutesy stuff, I understand what they're trying to do. This kind of stuff is just another example of where they are, basically turning Spider-Man into like a kid's comic book. And, again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that per se, But most kids don't read comic books these days. I'm sorry, they just don't. They're reading Dogman, right? And we don't need Dogman in Spider-Man. Maybe they think they do. Maybe that's how they think they're going to fix sales. But this particular panel, I think, encapsulates all the problems going on with this run of Spider-Man. It's too cute. It's not serious, and it does things that are out of character, right? I'm sorry, Dr. Octopus's arms are supposed to be evil. They're not supposed to be a dog. They're not supposed to be some kind of pet. You know, it, it's so frustrating. It really is. So, Amazing Spider-Man number 900. Here you go. The art's okay. It's not terrible. Presumably, we're going back to John Romita Jr. again with issue number 7. So who knows what that's going to be like. If you want to pick this up, yeah, knock yourself out. I don't really think it's worth $10. There's nothing in there really that I think is all that overwhelming or exciting. Furthermore, it's got Dan Slott in it, and Dan Slott's an asshole. So yeah, I said it. You run blockchains on people and you try to dictate who they can or can't follow, then I don't think that that's a mature thing. Just to go back to that, I got this preview, Spider-Man number 1, right? And it's by Dan Slott. Well, Mark Bagley's a great artist. I love Mark Bagley's art, but I'm not going to buy a book that Dan Slott's writing, at least until he unblocks me on social media. If you can't handle Twitter, then get off of Twitter. All right, Dan? That's just my opinion. So, or use the mute button. You can do that very effectively. So Rob Liefeld does that. Rob Liefeld doesn't block anybody. He just mutes people that irritate him. Maybe you should do that, Dan. Maybe you should be like Rob Liefeld. Okay. So anyway, again, the Amazing Spider-Man, the Sinister 7. Okay. Yeah, I guess what they're saying is 7 is the living brain. But anyway, if you want to read a book about the living brain coming back, because that was something you've been dying to see ever since he debuted in The Amazing Spider-Man number 8, this might be your jam. So anyway, again, The Amazing Spider-Man Legacy 900 number 6. I'll give this one, I'll give this one 2.5 stars out of 5 because it's not entirely awful. It's just kind of a waste of time. Anyway, thanks for watching Comics with Drew. I'm Drew, and I'll catch you next time.